Yeah, I've known Mike for a while through Toastmasters, where I learned to become better at speaking in front of audience. And Mike has been there for a while, also been a mentor when for some phases in Toastmasters. And on his second job, Mike works for HR and advises a lot of organization, including organization here, about how to hire people, how to manage their staff. So he has a lot of experience working with people. And from personal experience, I've learned that it's really important to get ready for interview. I've known, working back in Israel in IT, I've known people who were incredibly talented, but they crashed whenever they came to an interview. And I know I have another friend who specialized. He took courses and read books and really become proficient at interviews. And he got a job at Amazon through that.
Wow.
So it's all about being prepared to an interview, and then it's also best for the interviewer because you show your best side to them instead of just coming and under pressure failing to understand to answer the questions. So, Mike?
Thanks, Eddie. So, I don't generally work with the people that are applying for jobs. I generally work with the companies that are employing people. I've been running my own business called Essential HR for the last 13 years or something now, so it's been a while. And I've encountered a lot of situations where people are wanting jobs. We're trying to find the right people. Sometimes I'll run a recruitment process, but more usually I'm just advising off to one side. So when Adi said, well, what can I say to people who are perhaps wanting help in preparing for interviews, I put my cap on that says, okay, so what is it that as an employer we get motivated by when we see somebody coming along for an interview? Now you do of course have to get the interview first, and there's another whole issue there as to how do you get an interview. But I'm talking to you more specifically today about skills that you can display that hopefully will help you get that job once you've got an interview. So what do employers want? All right, well, broadly, an employer is looking for somebody in the interviews who show them that they've got the knowledge, the skills, the experience, the attitude. Now please, for the moment, don't look at what you've just been given, okay? Just keep it there and we will come to it in due course because I'm needing you to do a little bit of brainstorming first. Okay, so they're looking for somebody who's got that right mix. The skills, the experience, the attitude, the knowledge to do the job well. That's what they're looking for in the interview. They're comparing maybe 3 or 4 people who can do it best. What is your task in an interview? Your task is to do one thing. It's to answer this question. You have got to explain to the interviewer why it is you that they should be selecting. All the way through, that's what you're doing. You're determined to get them to understand why it should be you. Now, for those of you who've seen the Shrek movie, the very first one, I tend to watch the first of these things, the second and third and fourth and whatever tend to get not so good. But there's this donkey, right?
Yeah.
And the donkey wants to go with Shrek. He says, hey, pick me, pick me, pick me. You remember that little thing? Okay, don't do that in the interview. What you've got to do in the interview is persuade them to pick you because of what else you say. All right? So, the next thing you need to do is understand a little bit about the overall process that you're going through. The recruitment process. Typically, the recruitment process includes initially, they put an ad out, they didn't put that in there. First of all, the company puts out an ad saying, this is the person that we want. Now you've responded to that, you've sent them a letter, you've sent them your CV, and the letter and the CV are designed to persuade them that you are somebody that meets the description of the person that they want. Once you've done that, hopefully that has persuaded them, for the purposes of this exercise anyway, it's persuaded them that you're good enough that they're going to offer you an interview. So clearly you've got over that first hurdle. So you come in for a first interview. Now it depends on the type of company as to whether they have 1 or 2 interviews, whether they do things more than just an interview. Small businesses, you'll get an interview by the owner, the manager. If he or she likes you enough, you'll get offered the job. Bigger organizations will sometimes have a second interview. The first interview might just be with the HR manager or the department head, and then later the big guy comes in and sits down with the final selected candidate just to make sure they haven't made a mistake. Or they'll start running tests or asking you to come in for a day's work trial, something like that. You may be being interviewed initially by a recruitment consultant. Now they interview a lot more people. Rather than just interviewing 2 or 3, they're going to interview 10, 15, 20. So you've got to persuade the recruitment consultant that you are worth getting onto that shortlist for the company to interview. All the way through. Your goal is to answer that question. Why should they pick you for the next stage? So they're going through that sort of thing, and at the end of it, you'll get an offer if you're successful. Don't get impatient. It can take, particularly if you've got recruitment consultants involved, it can take 5 to 10 weeks to go through a recruitment process, and that can be frustrating. Right at the moment, we're going into a situation where if you've got an interview, put all your effort into it, because they're going to be extremely difficult to get now, probably for the next 6 to 12 months. That's just the way it is as we go into a sort of recession. No one's quite sure how big that recession's going to be, but we're going into a recession. There's an awful lot more people on Windsor's books that are now looking for jobs. So if you get an interview, it's worth giving it all you've got, because it might be the only interview you get for some time. So imagine the fact that yes, you've got an interview. You're now going to meet with the guy that hopefully is going to offer you the job. Forgive me if I say guy. Guys tend to mean females as well. Okay, I don't always remember to get both genders into what I say. You're going to meet with the person who is going to offer you that job. Okay, what are the sorts of things that might turn them off? Okay, now this is brainstorming time for you. Imagine that you are the person who's doing the recruiting. What sort of things would turn you off and make you think, no, I don't want to. I don't want to.
Punctuality. Yeah.
Punctuality, right?
Yeah.
If you're late for your interview, you've pretty much written off any chance of getting the job, right?
Yeah.
What else?
How are they dressing?
How do they dress?
Yeah.
Okay, really important. If you're going for a job as a truck driver, do you need to go for your interview in collar and tie?
No.
No, because the employer's going to say, what do I want with a collar and tie in a truck? You know, if you're going for a job as an accountant, well, it's been a long time since I've worn a tie, I have to be honest. But you certainly dress smart, professional. Okay, so you make your dress suit the job, but also you make the way you dress respectful towards the people that you're going to see. What else?
Greeting. How do you greet the person?
How do you greet
Yeah.
them? So what's a good way to
Eye
greet? Or
contact.
what's a bad way to greet?
Too close. I mean, like a friend is a formal greeting, like shaking hands. I would
Right.
say.
Shaking hands. So shake
And
hands.
And eye
Okay.
contact. Hi.
Now, that is good. This grip is a firm grip.
I'm used to that.
It's a firm grip, but it's not crushing.
No.
But it's not weak and wobbly.
No.
No.
Okay.
Very well.
And the trouble is, when you're nervous, and you always will be, it's yes, it can be difficult. Okay. So, if you practiced, if you thought through it, you think, yeah, okay, I'm doing this. I'm acting. Okay. You're acting, but you're trying to act like you. What else? What are the other things that might turn somebody off?
The way you speak.
Yes.
The way you speak.
Just the-
Like?
well, the tone, you might be speaking very casually, very off the cuff, just, not sort of quite in the moment, not interested,
Yeah.
not
You-
fully
Yeah.
there.
Should greet in
But just-
a good way, not like hello mate or something. You need to be just more polite, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. G'day, mate.
Yeah.
It's not the way you address somebody you're hoping will employ you.
Mhm.
Not unless they happen to be your mate.
Yeah.
So I suppose that's a bit different. So you're right. It needs to be a little bit more formal and certainly not too casual. You get into the interview and you're talking, and they ask you a question about your previous job.
No speaking negatively.
Don't speak negatively. Okay, if you speak negatively about your bosses in your previous job, your boss is going to think one thing about you, that the chances are you'll have negative thoughts towards him or her. So no, you don't run your previous bosses down, however much you might think they really sucked. Now occasionally you'll get asked, so why did you leave your previous job? That can sometimes be a difficult one, particularly if you've left after having a disagreement. So in that sort of situation, sometimes you have to be just honest. Say, look, sometimes you end up with a personality conflict or whatever, and for whatever reason, we started off fine, but I just felt I couldn't get on with my colleague, couldn't get on with my boss, and it was easier to leave. You just have to be honest sometimes, because if you're not, if you're dishonest or you leave a hole, the employer's starting to think, something about this person I don't trust. They're not being honest with me. I don't know what it is, but they can sense.
But you say you have to be honest sometimes or always? I mean, during the whole interview.
Hey, okay. So, it depends what they're asking you. There are certain questions that interviewers shouldn't ask. Like, how old are you? Do you have to answer that question?
No.
No. What does your wife do? Do you have to answer that question?
Well, it's not very personal, but yeah, I can. Yeah. No
You see,
problem.
you might choose to answer it,
Yeah.
but technically they shouldn't ask you that question. No
Yeah.
question about your age or your family status should come up in an interview.
Or also their our nationality, or we should.
Well, now that's an interesting one. If you're sitting there and you're talking in a strange accent for a New Zealander, now you could be Scottish or Irish or Colombian or whatever. All right, if you're talking in a strange accent, it can be a point of
They will
contact.
notice immediately. No worries.
That's right, exactly. So you've got nothing to hide. Obviously, you're not a
Criminal from Colombia.
So you might say, yeah, they may ask you the question, so where are you from? I mean, I ask it out of genuine interest. But in an interview, does it matter where I'm from? You don't say that because that's challenging, so you just answer the question. So be honest. But if they start asking you more personal, then you say, look, really, isn't that a bit personal? Or something like that. It's difficult. You don't want to be dishonest, but neither do you want to get tied up in these things. I mean, in the end, if you're being interviewed by somebody who wants to know your age and your children and this, that, and the other thing, the chances are they're not an employer you want to work for. Having said that, as I say, if you get an interview, you may want the job.
The thing is
Liz.
now some companies get around like the age thing, but they actually get you to do a pre-employment application form with your application, with your letter, with your CV. So they actually get your age.
They shouldn't have the
And-
date of birth on anything that they're doing beforehand. They shouldn't. Some of them will.
But they
Yep.
do, you know, like that's, you have
Yep.
to supply that information to be actually get into the process. So
Yeah.
they sort of,
And
They
the
did
problem is that if you complain about it, you're never going to get the job. So
yeah.
if somebody wants to be ageist,
Well, they
then
can.
they're going to be ageist. And yeah, you can come in for the interview and they're going to take one look at you and think,
Yeah.
you look as if you're 60 plus. Yeah, okay. What's wrong with that? Well, we need somebody who's going to be here at least for the next 10 years. I wouldn't want a job that had me tied down for 10 years anyway. Okay, so be honest where you can. Yeah, you should be honest the whole time. If they're going to be that upfront and ask you a question, then you need to think in terms of, okay, if I want this job, I've got to be able to take that degree of
confronting.
I was thinking it's a bit confronting, it's also a bit personal, but I've got to be prepared to stand up for
Yeah.
that. So, be honest. Yeah, as a general rule, I would say so. Now, I'm probably going to have to move on because otherwise I'm going to run out of time. So, there are a number of interview hints and tips that you can take away from this for how you behave in the interview itself, from the firm handshake and the friendly hello, down to things to do with questions. Now, we're going to cover a little bit now how you prepare for some of the questions. This is probably the most significant thing you can do in preparing yourself for an interview. What people don't like is interviewing someone who, okay, let's say you're interviewing for a job in Methven. I said, do you know where Methven is? Well, it's sort of inland there somewhere, isn't it? That's not a good look.
No.
You're applying for a job with ABC Coatings Limited. I say, well, do you know what we do in this company? Well, you paint. Not a good look. When you go into an interview, you need to be able to show that you've done your preparation. Now that means understanding a bit about the company and therefore why you want to work for them, because that's the next stage. You know what ABC Coatings does? Yes, so why do you want to work for us? Well, because. Okay? That's one of the reasons they'll give you a job, because they understand why you want to work for them, where they are. And you've got to know that. The other thing you need to do is to have prepared yourself for answering the questions that they're going to ask you. So how do you think you do that? How do you understand what sort of questions? How can you work out what sort of questions they're going to ask?
From the job description.
From the job description?
When you apply, they say the job description, so you can organize. Yeah, you can know what they are looking for.
That's one document. What else?
There's things you can find on the internet that is sort of like a general hints about questions that can be asked.
You can
That
do
be
that
general.
too. Yep. Well, we've got a slide about
Yeah.
general questions. Yes. What else?
As somebody who has done some interviews, probably.
Well, like attending something like this, it can help. Yes. Yeah. Mariana?
No.
Yeah,
it's
go
not.
on.
No, because I was going to say something, but it doesn't really make sense. That how you see yourself in the future for the company, so they maybe ask you that too.
They may well ask you that. Yep. So having an idea as to where you think you'd like to fit in does make a difference. Certainly in some jobs, perhaps more than others. What is the one thing that you can see that tells you about what the company is looking for this job?
Their ad.
Their ad.
Mm.
Okay. The job
It's
description.
not
The job description will sometimes
not
be 2 lines or 3 lines.
yeah.
So you want a job as a carpenter, well, your job description is to do carpentry. Does that help you? No. So some of them are more detailed, and they will tell you the list of tasks or responsibilities. And yes, they may ask you a few questions about whether you've done this sort of thing before. The ad tells you a bit more about what they are really looking for. So in this ad, we're trying to think for ourselves, what sort of questions might we be asked? The ad says, here is your opportunity to work as part of a friendly and professional service-oriented team who offer exceptional service to a variety of customers. Our rapid growing company needs an experienced mechanic for its large, busy automotive workshop, offering a variety of experience for a keen, self-motivated automotive technician. What sort of questions might they ask you? What do you think, by looking at that, would be the key words that might lead to questions?
Experience.
Experienced, okay.
Exceptional service.
Exceptional service, absolutely.
Teamwork.
Teamwork. Where's teamwork come?
Service oriented.
Team.
Team.
Team, yes. Thank you. It's quite possible. Yes.
Variety of experience.
No,
Yeah, variety of experience. They may decide to pick up on that.
How well you handle pressure, because it says it is a busy automotive workshop.
Okay.
Self-motivated.
Self-motivated.
Mhm.
So these are some of the words that you brought up that I haven't highlighted just is because you've looked at things slightly differently from me. There's no right and wrong, but yet they're a friendly organisation, so they're going to be looking for people who are friendly. Are they going to ask you questions about that, do you think?
No.
No, how are they going to judge that?
Right, just
By
by
your
the greeting at the
behavior.
end.
By how you behave in the interview.
Yeah.
Do you come across as friendly? Professional service oriented team, so they may ask you some questions about
Experience.
how you have behaved in a team environment. Exceptional service, how have you delivered exceptional service to a variety of customers? What sort of variety of people have you dealt with in your previous jobs? Are you a keen, self-motivated automotive technician? What does that tend to imply for you, self-motivated?
That you will find something to do.
That you will find something to do. What does it say you won't be like in the workplace?
You need to give more what they are asking for. If, let's say that,
You'll go beyond
Yes.
what they ask?
yeah,
Self-motivated people might do that, yes. What would you not look like if you're
Idle. To
self-motivated?
be idle in the.
You won't just be standing around doing nothing.
Mhm.
You won't be waiting to be told what to do. Why? Well, probably because the
Yeah,
owner
easy.
doesn't have the time to keep coming round to his 5 staff saying, do this, do this, do this, do this, because he's too busy doing other things himself. So he needs to know that his team will function together and that they'll all come up with good ideas. So these are the sort of things that they might start asking questions about in the interview. It's something called either behavioral competency-based interviewing questions. You may hear words bandied around like that. Don't worry about what they call it. What you need to worry about is, or think about, is they're looking for certain behaviors from the person they're looking for in the workplace. And they are going to ask you questions about how you have demonstrated this in the past. They might ask you, what would you do in this situation? Particularly if you haven't had much of a past experience, then they're going to, they'll be a little bit more on, well, how would you respond if we did this to you, if we said this to you? But what you find when you're starting out in life on the work front is that you start digging back into, well, what have you done in your life? Obviously not work, but you've done things. You've been part of a sports team, or some sort of community project, or you've had responsibilities at home. I mean, older kids who've got younger siblings who spend a lot of their spare time actually managing and helping raise their younger brothers and sisters. You learn a huge amount doing that sort of thing. It's not wasted. Self-motivated? You know, if you're left at home looking after 2 younger siblings all evening, I have no idea whether you've got younger siblings, so I'm not part of this.
She's
But
laughing.
if you're doing something like that, have you maybe exercised some self-motivation
Yes.
in terms of deciding what you're going to do to help keep them occupied? That might actually prove to be a good answer to a question in an interview. You know, always look back and see, well, what have I learned from different aspects of my life? So, I'm going to now take you through, well, how do you turn this sort of analysis into preparing for an interview and answering questions? So, self-motivated. That's the one that I selected to do a little bit of thinking around. These are the sorts of questions you might get asked in an interview. So, Liz, give me an example. I'm not really asking a question. Okay. Give me an example of a time when you had to push yourself to deliver against the odds. So that's maybe a bit coping with pressure, but it's also self-motivating. How do you ensure that you stay motivated during stressful times at work? And tell me about when you've had to motivate yourself to achieve something difficult. Do any of these say in your previous job? No.
Your situation.
It's your situations. So it could be that you're captain of a football team. It could be that, as I say, you're babysitting. It could be in a relationship, maybe in your marriage, where you have had to work at something difficult. And if you can link it back to showing your self-motivation, that's cool. So what I'm saying now is, if you're preparing for an interview, I'm going to step outside of my slides now briefly. Where you are at now in New Zealand in this post-COVID era, for the next 6 to 12 months probably, getting a job will be one of the most difficult things that you have ever tried to do. Because the number of people that WINZ are trying to help get jobs is right up there again, and the number of companies that are seeking to recruit is not. So there's a lot of competition for jobs. Now, if you're sitting around this table and you are also not a New Zealand resident, that makes it even more difficult. If you're a New Zealand resident, but you still speak in an accent or that is difficult for the employer to understand, again, it makes it more difficult. It's not that they are discriminating against you, it's just that if you've got two people with exactly the same skill set, exactly the same potential benefit to the organization, and one is easy for me to understand and the other one I actually have to work really hard at, you're going to go for the one that's easy to understand. So for those of you who are in that sort of, you've got an even bigger hurdle that you have to overcome. Similarly, if you are new to the country, even if when I arrived, how many years ago it was now? 25 something years ago. Is that right? Yeah, 25 years ago, 26 years ago, when I arrived in this country, I had residency. It still took me a year to get a job. I came as a qualified chartered accountant, but I didn't want to work in the area of chartered accountancy. I wanted to work as an HR person. But I had a certain amount of experience, but it wasn't New Zealand experience. So even though I speak very good English, I should be easy to understand, my communication skills should be quite reasonable, I still really battled to get a job because I didn't have the experience in a New Zealand setting. And that's what most of the areas I was looking to get jobs in wanted. So the chances are it's a hard road. What does that mean? It means that you have to work at it. What it does not mean is that you go into an interview feeling sorry for yourself. You do not go into an interview expecting not to succeed. Doesn't matter how many times you get knocked back from interviews or from applications, not getting interviews. Doesn't matter how many times you get knocked back. Just keep getting up and trying again. Because if you go into an interview feeling sorry for yourself, or if you go into an interview expecting that you're not going to succeed, surprisingly enough, that tends to come across. And on the interviewing side, we think, this person really doesn't have the level of confidence we're looking for. Can't put my finger on it, but somehow that confidence isn't there. So you have to persuade yourself that yes, you do have the skills for this, and if anyone's going to beat you for this job, well, they're going to be a really fantastic candidate. Okay? So I'll say that just as an aside. Now, how do you persuade them that you are the one they need to choose? One of the things you're doing is showing that you've prepared. They may not even realize this is preparation, but you show you've prepared because when they ask you a question, you're quite confident about answering it, and you're confident about answering it because you've prepared your answers. So, Here's another one. Exceptional service. Okay, so we had self-motivate and exceptional service. Give me an example of a time when you went beyond the call of duty at work. And you've got all these in your handouts, by the way. So how do you know when you've done a really good job? Describe a time when you believe you've delivered exceptional services. So if you've decided that they're looking for exceptional service, they may ask you one of these questions, maybe pick 1, 2 of them. You may not get it right. But what you're going to do is you say, okay, when did I deliver exceptional service at work? If it wasn't at work, just leave those 2 words off, deliver exceptional service. Come up with 2 or 3 examples. Have that prepared. You can always take notes with you into an interview. Some people think, I should be able to just sit there and show that I know everything. Actually, it doesn't always work that way, because then you stammer and you stutter and you can't remember things. Having the notes for you to refer to, tell you about this as an example. The fact you've done the thinking about it is what really makes a difference. So you set yourself up a form, something like this. Exceptional service. Here's the question. Give me an example of a time when you went beyond the call of duty. Example 1 and example 2. Another reason you have at least 2 examples is because if you've used up one example in one question and it's the same sort of situation that comes up in another question, you don't have to quote the same example, you can give them a different one. And that's the preparation. More than anything else that is going to make a difference for you when you go for an interview. Are you going to be able to come up with all the questions they ask you? No, you'll never do that. And in fact, one of the things that I try very hard to do as an interviewer is to think of a question that they won't have prepared for. Because as an interviewer, if you ask somebody a question and they, all right, here's my answer to that question, you're going to think, okay, I've got a clever one here. But if you're asking for behavioral examples, so if you want an automotive technician, you say, okay, have you ever changed the wheel on a car? Whatever it is, I don't know what automotive technicians do, but
Probably not changing tires. No.
sorry, don't do changing tires, but they're fiddling around with the engine, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. So, have you done X, Y, and Z? And they're going to say, yeah. Well, you know that because it's on their CV, so you shouldn't be asking that question. You should be asking the question, so have you had a situation where you and a workmate had a confrontation at work? How did you behave? How did you respond? How did you deal with your feelings? That makes a real person out of you. And if you know how to be honest and open about that because you've actually thought through how to answer it, it's a real help. So here are some of the killer questions. These are the general questions. You can guarantee that you're going to probably get 2 of those questions in an interview. So you should be prepared, but not in terms of, okay, I'm going to read you out the answer. Be prepared in terms of, I know how I'd answer this one. What are your weaknesses and how will you deal with them? Okay, how many people here would reckon that, well, no, I've got no real weaknesses, I'm all good. Anybody feel like that?
No.
No. Okay. But you want them to choose you. You want them to think that you're better than everybody else at this job. So you're actually going to say, well, I've got a weakness over here.
It's better to know your weaknesses than actually not knowing them.
That's right.
Yeah.
If you can show them that you understand your weaknesses, that you know what you're not good at, then you can show them, and this is how I deal with it. And then they feel good about that. I'm having to work with my son, sort of, at the moment, who maintains he doesn't have an anger problem. He just loses it sometimes. I'm sorry? What part of losing it is not being angry? He said, no, I can control my anger, but when I lose it, I can't. Yeah, exactly. So, do you recognize you've got a weakness, son? Okay, yeah, I've got a weakness. Sometimes I lose it. Most of the time he manages to remain quite calm and placid, but every now and then he loses it. Most recent time when he lost it, he broke his hand in 3 places. He didn't attack another person. He tried to attack a steel ball. and steel doors are a little bit unforgiving.
Yeah.
So he's learning a lesson. But it's a question of, okay, so you've learned that about yourself. Have you learned how to deal with that, how to respond to those feelings when they erupt inside? Because in future, you're going to have to explain to an interviewer why you decided to leave your last job because your hand got broken and you couldn't do the job. So being able to answer that question is really important.
Also be truthful.
Oh yeah.
Because if you look at some of the guides online, they will guide you to look for a weakness that you can also present in some kind, which is not really a weakness, but then don't try lying, because then what happens is you are the interviewer has to sit through 50 people saying I am perfectionist.
Yeah, that's
Oh,
right.
yeah.
And that's horrible, because that's the thing that everyone goes to, trying to find a weakness which is not actually a weakness. Yeah, so be real.
Be real. This is the honesty in this sort of instance,
Yeah.
very important, and actually is a strength. So in one of your strengths is demonstrated by knowing what your weakness is, just as Mariana said. Tell me why you want this job. That's often a really important question, and sometimes it's the very first one you get asked in an interview. So why do you want the job? Why do you want this job? Why do you want this job working for us? The number of covering letters to CVs that come in that are obviously just cut and paste from their previous covering letter to the previous job they applied for, that basically says something along the lines of, I am very keen to have a job. That doesn't help. When you send off, if you're going to get an interview, your covering letter will have said something like why you want this job working for this organization, and you need to be able to back that up then in the interview. How would your previous manager describe you? This is another one where honesty is critical, because they're going to phone your previous manager and they're going to ask.
Oh, definitely.
And even if they don't do that until after they've offered you the job, if they're sensible, they'll tell you something along the lines of, okay, I'm giving you this job offer, but there's a 90-day trial period. And now that you've accepted the job, I want to be able to speak to your previous manager. If the previous manager tells me stuff that you kept hidden, then don't expect to outlast your 90-day trial. Okay, so this one is important. And that's where, again, honesty is really. Why should we hire you? Well, that's what I said, it's all about why you. But don't spend 10 minutes telling them why I should hire you. Don't spend 5 minutes telling them all about their company just to show that you've read their website. Okay, they're not impressed, they're bored. They say, I know what my company does. You don't need to tell me what my company does. On the other hand, it's not on there, it must be on the next slide, do have questions of your own. Not too many.
How many are good?
Sorry?
How many are good?
Maybe 2.
Okay.
And I would say that's probably enough. One of them can be a question that relates to the organization. If you have looked at their website or talked to people about it, and there's something about the organization that you find really interesting, or you want to know a bit more about, then ask. I noticed on your website that you do X, Y, Z, or that you did this job for this particular organization. What was it like? Or what is actually involved in doing this? Something along those lines, because it interests you. So you say, I've always been intrigued. It's words like that show you are interested in their business much, much better than trying to name drop, or tell them that, yeah, I've read your website, I see you do this, that, and the other thing. It doesn't persuade your potential bosses. Otherwise, be wary about asking a question about remuneration. Okay, generally speaking, you don't go to the remuneration question during an interview. I say the same thing to the companies, to the managers. Don't talk about remuneration. You're interested in whether this person is best for your job. If you decide they are the best person, and they've decided you're the best employer, now you can come to a reasonable agreement as to how much you're going to pay. So you don't do it until you reach that stage, and that's generally not at the interview. If you get to the end of the interview and they say, just 1 second, just stay here, we'll come back, and they go out, and they come back 2 or 3 minutes later and they say, we're really impressed by your interview, we want to offer you the job. Now you can talk. Now you talk remuneration. Because they say to you, we're prepared to offer you this job, we'd love you to come work for us, and it pays $20 an hour. Well, $25 an hour at the moment, you know, that doesn't work. But at least you can now talk about it. Then you're into the negotiation because they've said you're my preferred candidate. But otherwise, don't go there. What else? Right. So this is my sort of conclusion slide. So in terms of summary, when you're going for an interview, remember right up front, you create an impression with how you introduce yourself to them. How you look, how you shake their hands, eye contact can be extremely difficult for some people to maintain eye contact with somebody that is potentially a boss, somebody who's got power over them, authority, etc., etc. But you need to make a connection. Now they should be trying to make a connection with you. And they say, you're from Colombia, right? I have always wanted to go to visit Bogota.
Oh, yeah,
Wow.
I have family there.
It's great. Or you see, you're a Toastmaster. You know, I used to be a Toastmaster. I was there for many years. Which one? Which club do you belong to? Yeah, the employer is trying to do that. They're trying to take away the fear and the nerves from the interview setting. But they themselves are nervous. They're not good at this. The last time they recruited someone, the person lasted 2 weeks. The time before that, they ended up ripping them off 3 months down the track. They're worried that they're not going to make the right decision. So, I know sometimes I've said, sometimes you have to act. And if you have to act in order to give a firm handshake, if you have to act in terms of maintaining eye contact, then do so.
But I think it's better to practice in advance, like practice with the real life, with your friends, with any stranger,
Yeah.
so that they will be spontaneous.
So if you go back to that interview hints and tips, one of the lines there is practice with a friend or coach.
Yeah.
So find someone like Adi, who you can sit down with and say, Adi, it's good to meet you, you know, and look him in the eye. That's right. Doesn't matter who it is.
Yeah.
Find someone to practice with. When you're into the questions, answer their questions, but keep to the point. I have conducted interviews on a number of occasions where I was really impressed at this stage. You ask 2 questions and you find you're a quarter of an hour into the interview because they've taken 5 to 10 minutes to answer each question. Already by that stage I'm thinking maybe we can leave out these next questions and just get to the last one and wrap it up. Because it's a bit like turning up late for the interview. If you talk too much in the interview, the person is sitting there and thinking, every time I give this person instruction, I'm going to have to put aside a quarter of an hour.
But sometimes the short answer is not good either, because
Too short?
especially when young people, I work with some young people, and you can ask a question, yeah, that was it.
That's not an answer. Okay, I mean, what I say, it's not an answer. If you ask the right question, yes and no is not a suitable answer. Give me an example of, now, you're being asked for an example. You're not being asked for your life history. But you do need to give an example. You answer the question, give me an example, give them an example. But keep to the point. Don't give them an example of something else you want to say. No, I wasn't asking about that. I was asking for whether you've actually managed a situation where 2 people below you were in conflict. I didn't ask you where you had a conflict with them. Have you managed a situation where 2 other people were in conflict?
Is it okay to ask if I have answered the question?
Correct.
Because
It
sometimes it's
absolutely
tricky
is.
to read the
Yep.
body language to the other person, you know, especially yes, I mean people, the interviewers, they don't show.
You should be up here because that's another bit I forgot to say on this interview hints and tips. is clarify the question. No, don't apologise, that's good. Clarify the question. If you're not quite sure what they mean, say, do you want me to give an example of this? And they say, yeah. Or no, not like that, like this. Or if you answer the question, you say, does that answer your question? And there are times when I think, well, not exactly. It sort of did, but I was really wondering whether, and then I rephrase the question. So it's a good technique. I haven't covered this, it was on another slide, but I thought perhaps too much detail. When you're planning how to answer a question, think of the situation, your action, and what the outcome was. Your action might be a word, it might be something you did, but if they want an example of how you managed this situation, describe the situation. Describe what you did, describe what the outcome was. And I said, have some questions. So here's the questions going backwards and forward, and then at the end, generally, they'll say, is there anything else? And you'll say, think about it, no, I've had the answer to this one. No, I've got all the information that I needed. They'll be doing the same. And then you simply say, look, I really look forward to working with you. Something like that. I want this job. Unless, of course, you got to the end of the interview and have decided actually you don't want the job. But that does happen sometimes. In which case you probably don't say anything in the interview.
No.
Okay, now, are there any questions? Yeah, okay, so it was a bit longer than you said.
Yeah.
Liz.
One thing with like the handshake thing, given sort of COVID, I have noticed lately that some people are very hesitant about physical contact.
Yeah.
Like whereas before you just automatically put out
Yeah.
your hand in situations that's like you don't want to be left with
We
your
spend
hand.
3 months learning not to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, my first instinct when I meet people is to shake hands
Yeah.
in a professional setting.
Yeah.
But I know that that's
Yeah, technically
You
I
don't
should
wanna be-
probably have used hand sanitizer before shaking
no.
your hand.
Yeah.
Be sensitive.
yeah.
If you sent, I mean, if the employer comes up to you and says, Adi, good to meet you, come and sit down.
Yeah. That's
Then
Yeah.
you're
There's a
probably
key.
going to have to shake hands.
yeah.
And just remember to sanitize yourself as soon as you leave.
Well, I'm a handshaker, but I don't want to be left.
Yeah, we
With
define like that, yeah.
You know that.
To a certain extent, be guided by
Yeah.
the person that's interviewing you.
Yeah.
It's their office.
Yeah.
It's they're the ones who conduct the interview. They will, if they say, it's good to see you. Have a seat.
Yeah.
Okay, there's no handshake.
Yeah.
On the other hand, if they've come round from their desk and they're coming to greet you, you know there's going to be a handshake.
Yeah.
So you can judge it
Depends
that
the
way.
situation,
Good question.
yeah.
You were going to ask a question as well?
No.
No?
If
No, go for it.
from an interviewer point of view,
Mm-hmm.
how much do you read the body language? How much is more important the body language than what really they are talking?
It is a really difficult one because it depends on the interviewer. I read body language. And so if I'm interviewing, the body language is really important. I'm looking for engagement. I'm looking for signs that the person's falling asleep because they're yawning or they're stifling a yawn and things like that, which is okay in this environment. But if you're trying to get a job, no, you don't want to be doing that.
No.
Which is why I don't like Zoom meetings. I can't see the body language so well. Face to face, one to one, much easier.
How much important is that for you as an interviewer?
So, for me, the body language adds to or detracts from what is being said. So I'm interested in what's being said. The body language will tell me whether the person is really nervous, and therefore some of the things that they say, I'm thinking, okay, it's just because they're nervous. You can tell that from the body language. And then I'll be trying even more to help them relax and not be quite so nervous. But many interviewers, because they are nervous, they don't do that. And they are just going to be listening to what you say. I have a distinct memory of interviewing one lass who was absolutely ideal for the job, but the way she spoke was really difficult. And she just very, very fast. And I phoned her previous boss, her boss at the time, as a reference check and said, how does she normally speak? Does she normally speak very, very fast? No. Does she normally speak a lot? No, she's normally quite measured.
She was nervous.
She was nervous. It became very clear, and we were able to corroborate that using a reference. So it's the body language really important for me, because if the boss had said, yes, she's always like that, she would never have got the job. Whatever words she'd have said would have been overcome by the way in which she said it or the way in which she
Did she go for another interview for a second one?
No, didn't need to. She got the job. Other questions?
So I found in past interviews that sometimes prospective employers ask you what, they'll actually say, what do you see yourself per hour, and that's actually a really difficult question, because from my perspective, I'm applying for a job. It's really up, in a way, what are they offering, because you can either set yourself too low or set yourself completely out, because you've said, say, $23 an hour and they're thinking 19. So it's
what I do there. I would advise you in the same way that I advise the employer, because the employers have the same thing. They're in this interview, and the interviewee, the candidate, says, "Oh, so how much do you expect to pay for this job?"
Yeah. So.
And the employer is sort of saying that, well, it depends on how good the person is that we offer the job to. Okay, what's the real question? The real question that both parties are interested at this stage is, are there limits? Is there an upper limit beyond which you're never going to go, and below which I'm never going to accept? Because in that case, we're wasting each other's time. More so at a senior level. If you're going for a salaried position as an office manager, where you want a salary of at least $80,000 a year, and they're not prepared to offer more than 65, there is no point in even progressing those discussions. So if that's the case, I encourage an interviewee, candidate, to ask that question beforehand. Talk to the HR person or whoever is doing the recruiting and say, is there an upper limit? For me, I would need to. You don't necessarily want to say what your bottom line is, because that's all you're going to get offered. But is there an upper limit?
Yeah.
So in an interview, if the prospective employer asks you, so how much do you think you're worth? You say, well, hey, I'm worth the earth, aren't I? I mean, I am. How can you put a value on me?
Yeah.
But you can say, look, I'm open to any reasonable pay for this job. I haven't actually got a firm view on it. That's what I would encourage people to say. Keep your options open.
Yeah, that's what I usually sort of tend to, but some of them don't sort of like it.
Well, no, they don't. But then you follow it up with look, I'm reasonably open.
Yeah.
Do you have a particular range within which you need to pay? Because if there is, then I can say, yeah, no, I'm not uncomfortable with somewhere with that sort of range. So it is difficult, because in the end, it's only when you get the offer that you know whether you're happy with the hourly rate. Because that has other questions like, what about overtime pay? What about other benefits? Yeah. Other questions?
I may want to add something from personal experience. Well, actually, also, I didn't introduce myself. My name is Adin. I'm the coordinator of the Hakatay Multicultural Council, a non-government organization that also runs the Mid-Canterbury Migrant Center and Newcomers Network, trying to help people who are new to the district and migrants. But before doing that, before moving to New Zealand, in past life, I was a software developer, a programmer, and I've been through many jobs. And if there is something that I regret, is not documenting things. Because suppose I want to change and revert back to being a software developer here in New Zealand, I'll get asked the questions that Mike said about something that I've done 4, 5, 6, 7 years ago, and it's getting hard to remember. Think about, there is a talk about an example, the story. Think about the mechanic, for example, and they have a story that after about working in the new garage for 2 months, a truck came in and they had a certain trouble with the engine and no one could figure it out. Three technicians already fell and they were going to replace the engine, and then I had an idea and checked it and managed to fix it and saved them $10,000. That's a story that future employer wants to hear. That's your wins. The problem is that after the mechanic did that, they kept on working in the same place for 2.5 years with hundreds of cars, and they don't remember that story. My point is that we usually think about those interview questions before the next interview, between jobs, and that's a huge mistake. That's something I regret, because you're never in the last job you'll ever have. There will be always interviews in the future. So whenever you have some kind of win, something you did brilliantly at work, some conflict you resolved, get a diary and document these things.
Yeah.
Because years later, preparing for those interview questions, you'll need that.
Yeah, it'll be easy.
Yeah.
Thank
Good
you.
idea.
That's very, very valuable. Yes.
Definitely.
And it's something that I say actually in relation to CVs, if I give a talk to people about maintaining CVs. The application, when you send off your application before you've got an interview, it's your CV that needs to, if you've got some of these stories, if they're really good ones, they're on the CV. Because that's part of what persuades the company to actually offer you an interview. And you're right, the only way to keep that up to date is as you go. And there's another sideline to that one as well. If you're doing that, that document can become quite big. So when you send off your CV, you go through and you cull. You take out anything that's not relevant, and you just send them the stuff that is. So that's a one-off bite, but absolutely very, very important. Thank you all very much for coming. Good luck in whenever you ever need to